Like many newer Resident Evil fans, I was introduced to the series with the modern games.
Welcome to the family, son.
But since I've played all the new ones, I found myself looking back and curious about the original trilogy that started this entire franchise. I've heard so many times from hardcore fans how much better the original Resident Evil 2 and 3 are compared to their remakes, how much was lost in the translation of those experiences for a modern audience. Curiosity got the better of me, and so I finally played the original Resident Evil 1, 2 and 3, and it completely changed how I look at the remakes, though perhaps not in the ways that you might expect.
That's weird.
But before we get into that, hi, I'm Jerry and welcome to my channel Scharfsinn, a place for game reviews, essays, and the occasional analysis focused on games from a variety of different genres. I also like to write reviews over on Backlogged to share my immediate experiences with the games I play. If you're interested in any of that, I'd be glad to see you stick around. But now, let's get started. To set the scene in a bit more detail, I want to briefly describe my history with the franchise, so you know where I'm coming from and how it shaped my experience with these old classics. My first exposure to the series was Resident Evil 7 in 2017, and I didn't even play it myself back then. I watched someone else play it on YouTube. It might have been PewDiePie or someone else, but I don't remember exactly. What I do recall is that it struck me as the scariest piece of media I had ever seen, and for a long time it has defined my perception of the horror genre as a whole. The first Resident Evil game that I actually played through ended up being RE5. I know, definitely a random pick, but the reason why I chose it was the fact that it had co-op, and so I played it with a friend, and it's one of my fondest memories playing a game together.
What is that?
After that, I would go on to play the Resident Evil 2 remake, which is still my absolute favorite in the series, the Resident Evil 3 remake, Village, Resident Evil 4 remake, Resident Evil 6, 7, and eventually I decided to give true classic survival horror a try with the remake of the original Resident Evil. And that was an experience, to be sure. I appreciated a lot about Resident Evil 1 Remake when I first played it. Of course, the environments are beautiful, the pre-rendered backgrounds still look phenomenal to this day, and this game came out in 2002, which is unbelievable to be honest. It's so atmospheric, and not only because of its environments but also its sound design and music. It all fits together perfectly. I had my issues with the story though, and particularly the gameplay. You can imagine this was my first fixed camera perspective game that I played, and to say it was a tough thing to get used to would be putting it mildly, because I struggled a lot with that. I didn't really like it, in fact, because I was so used to being able to aim properly and have this more responsive control scheme from the newer games. I also struggled with the puzzle and level design, because there were several times when I was completely stumped as to where to go, and it took me literal hours to figure out what to do, and end up being something that was obscured by the fixed camera perspectives, and that soured me on that. Even though I appreciate a lot, it took me a long time to beat it, and I left it with a bit of a sour taste, to be honest. In the meantime, I have played Resident Evil 2 and 3, which I'll get to later, the originals, but I went back to the actual original one now, after all that, and I liked it. I liked it a lot, in fact. The original Resident Evil 1 is very cheesy, very 90s. It's infamous for its bad writing. It's just straight up silly dialogue, like the iconic "You were almost a Jill sandwich" line. But there is a charm to that. I really like watching these cutscenes and this trashy presentation. I know it's bad, but it's the good kind of bad. It's the one that you want to keep watching because it's just so hilarious. But the game itself, the whole design of the levels, the mansion, and the combat, since I already played the remake, I knew what to expect. I knew what to do, where to go, and how to approach the experience as a whole, how to manage save items and in general key items. And I had a very pleasant time with it, to be honest. I didn't struggle all that much. I had a few moments where I had my issues with the combat, specifically with the boss fights, which is a common problem in all three of these original Resident Evil games. The boss fights are not good, in my opinion. I noticed that a lot of the puzzles are more simplistic in the original Resident Evil compared to the remake. There were definitely a lot of new ones that were put into the remake that changed it up more, and also a lot of new rooms and sections of the map. I was surprised by how much actually was missing in the original game. It's strange when you go back from the remake to the original and feel like there's something missing. That's a very odd feeling to have. But still, the level design here is super tight, especially for a first entry in the series. While I noticed that some areas were over a bit too quick and were expanded in the remake to be more elaborate, like the section with the tanks and the sharks, which was super short and uneventful in the original. But it's still a very nice game to breeze through, even if the puzzle design isn't always as intricate as it could be. Many people say that the remake replaces the original, but I think this still has a lot of charm to this day that is, I guess, bad, but also hasn't been carried over to the remake, and there's something lost there. Something else was gained, of course, but it's not the same. And I think if I went back now to play the remake, it might become one of my favorite games in the series, because now I get it. Now I'm used to the control scheme, I'm used to the level design, how you're supposed to play. I'm definitely going to do that someday. But let's get to the other games in this trilogy, starting with Resident Evil 2. As I said before, the remake is one of my favorite games in the series, and in fact one of my favorite games of all time. So going back to the original, of course I had high expectations, because this is the foundation that one of my favorite games was built upon, and I liked it a lot as well. I think it's also better than the original Resident Evil 1, because I think it has a better narrative. It's still a bit clunky and has that 90s awkward charm to it, but it's definitely better, and the general pacing and structure of it feels more fleshed out. The R.P.D. police station, which is already so great in the remake, is just as good in the original, which is maybe a wrong way to put it. But yeah, the level design is so phenomenal. There's all these little parts of R.P.D. that interconnect, and you have to backtrack a lot, remember which key items you need to use where, and it's so elaborate, makes you think and look at what you have and explore properly. And that's something I always really like in Resident Evil, when you have to really look at the environments and look at what you missed. Apart from the level design itself, also the ambience of Resident Evil 2 is timeless. I mean, the R.P.D. theme, the music it plays in the main hall is so iconic for a reason, because it conveys this melancholy but also a sense of peace, of safety. The same goes for the save room theme, which is one of the best in the series, no doubt. I like the more subtle minimalist style they're going for in the newer games, but there's something special and unique about these old themes. Resident Evil 1, the original, had a great atmosphere already, but Resident Evil 2 puts it on another level, thanks to how much more detailed the environments are and how much mood is conveyed through the lighting. One of the main things that people criticize that the remake lost was the zapping system, which is where you can play through, you can play through both games as Claire and Leon and have these A and B runs, but in the original, actually these interweave and are logical. So you don't fight the same bosses when you cross through the same space as Claire after you did it as Leon. You see little remnants of what Leon did, so it makes sense in the timeline that these interweave and it's one complete story. Whereas in the remake, these are mixed together, so much of the A and B runs are actually the same. You do it in different orders, and there are some extra rooms, and of course the story is different, there are other characters, but you do a lot of the same things and fight the same bosses, which doesn't actually make logical sense. So that's one thing that I really appreciate about the original. And also Mr. X, the big stalker enemy that chases you in the remake as well, where he chases you in both runs. In the original, he's just in the B run scenario, which is interesting. I don't know if I think it's better or worse, to be honest, that he's only in half the game, basically, but it definitely brings more variety into these two runs, which is arguably better. But being chased through a station as Leon on your first run is honestly a feeling I will never forget, and I think that trade-off was worth it.
Open the door. This is my neighborhood. Open the door.
Unfortunately, my experience with the original Resident Evil 2 was sour towards the end because of the boss fights. I ended up doing the B run as Claire, and I got to the end, I got to the final boss, but I didn't have any healing items left, and there was no way for me to get back and get more anywhere. I went into this fight and I tried to do it, and I just could not, because he is super fast, you rarely have any time to get out of the way. I know that these original Resident Evil games with boss fights, that they are about positioning and using space in a strategic way, but when you have a boss that is this fast that can close the distance in a split second, and you are so slow, especially when you're wounded. I was wounded and it was almost impossible to avoid attacks, and so I actually got softlocked during this fight. I could not beat it for the life of me. I should have stacked up on healing items earlier on, but I just couldn't, and there was no way for me to rectify that mistake. On PS5 you can actually rewind up to I think a minute or two. I did this rewind like dozens of times and I just could not do it, and at some point I gave up, and yeah, that soured me on the experience, which is a shame because the first half, especially the R.P.D section, is so good, and in the end that just brought down my experience quite a bit. And I also think that the lab section, I like it in the original Resident Evil 2, but the remake, which remixes a lot of the puzzles and expands on it in general, does a better job here. Also, the ammo economy is much better, because in Resident Evil 2 the original we have so much ammo, which is almost ridiculous at certain points, and in the remake it's a much better balance as to how much you get, which keeps the tension up. Healing items is another thing, which, as I discussed with the final boss fight, I had issues with that. But still, Resident Evil 2 is a classic for a reason, and I did enjoy it a little bit more also than the first Resident Evil. Despite the issues with the A and B scenarios in the remake, it's still a much better game in my opinion, thanks to how much it refined the gameplay mechanics and storytelling. Nonetheless, playing the original was still worth it, absolutely, and it has given me an entirely new level of appreciation for how the remake built upon an already fantastic foundation. But that brings us to Resident Evil 3, which is the one that I had the most trouble with.
Resident Evil.
As I said, I'll take the remake first, and I know all the criticisms that are brought up against it. Levels were cut, the Nemesis has been brought down from a stalker enemy to just a set piece, essentially. Many parts of the game were redesigned, there's a lot of cut content, entire boss fights have been changed or replaced, and it's a lot shorter as well. Even with that knowledge, I was still surprised by how many parts of this game were completely new to me. Even the opening Raccoon City section is so much more elaborate and detailed than what you get in the remake, but also all the later parts, like of course the clock tower, which everyone keeps talking about, the clock tower section, which is almost cut entirely from the remake, and that's a real shame because it is such a cool location. In general, I like that it's a bit faster than the first two Resident Evil games, that you have a dodge. Still, I have a major issue with Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which is in fact the Nemesis himself. I know, he is a very beloved feature of the third game, and I do think he's a very effective survival horror element, and the moments where he chases you randomly, where he pops up and you just have to run away, that holds up to this day, absolutely. But the boss fights against him, like actually fighting against him, is honestly almost ruined my entire experience with the game on the first run, because you have to dodge, essentially. He's even faster than some of the bosses in Resident Evil 2, which was a struggle to run away from them in certain arenas. And here it's even worse because the Nemesis is just so incredibly fast, and even just aiming at him takes such a long time, and the dodge is just straight up clunky. I mean, I've seen videos of people who have mastered it and who can beat Nemesis like it's nothing, but I struggled so much with it, to the point again where I had to use the rewind feature a lot. There are some fights that you can avoid with him, there are optional fights, but there are some also where you have to fight him, and especially one later on, this one just broke me. It's such an awful combination because the dodge system is so weird, Nemesis is so fast, and you often can't aim properly at him because the camera angles obscure him from your view, and he often stun locks you because he can grab you and throw you down, and if you're not spamming the buttons fast enough, then he can grab you again, and that's game over. I just hated that part. I just hated fighting the Nemesis in this game.
Next time, take the fucking hit!
This game is so good in many ways. The level design is just as intricate as before, and I like the faster pacing and the emphasis on combat and the idea of the dodge. But the execution of it soured me on it. I just ended up not liking Resident Evil 3 very much, and that feels awful to say because there are so many parts of this game that work to this day and better than they do in the remake. But as a game itself, I actually enjoy playing the remake more because of the modern control scheme, because it's less of a pain to deal with. Simple as that. So yeah, this was my experience with the original Resident Evil games. Definitely a lot different than I expected in many ways, and very much like I did in others, because I thought that I would absolutely adore Resident Evil 2 most of all, but I ended up just liking it because of the softlock issues that I had. But overall, I think these games hold up and they're still worth playing, all three of them, despite the remakes. I know the remakes of 1 and 2 may be better and more complete games, but I don't believe in the idea that remakes ever can fully replace an original game, because they are always a new interpretation of them. I think it's also good that these are available on modern consoles and PC. They are on GOG, they are now on Steam. I know there's some issues with the DRM that people are having. It's also on PS5. People give Capcom trouble for, well, neglecting these originals, but I think they don't actually do that. They ported these over, maybe due to fan backlash, but they are there, they are playable. You don't have to emulate them, which is just super nice. You can have both the originals and the remakes on the same platform. That's the way it should be. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think about these original Resident Evil games? Do you prefer the originals or the remakes? Let me know all about it down in the comments below, and I will see you again in the next video. Take care.